out of the budget earlier this year. This is just putting,
Can you make sure and speak into that? Thank you.
sorry, is this better?
Yes.
Almost too good. So it was in the budget. It was pulled out at the beginning of the year, and this is just going to put it back into the 2022 budget as they're seeing passenger counts tick up. And there's also another strategy to get better pricing in this construction environment by pairing it with other projects that are ongoing at the airport. So that's a $19 million request for fiscal 22. The next one is to move the abandoned vehicle unit from DFA to police. And this is a change request that would happen in both 21 and 22. So the 21 change would be moving the personnel, and for operational reasons, that's effectively already happened. So this would be effective August 1st. So the change for this year, moving the personnel. The change for next year is moving the budget associated with those personnel and a little bit of M&O spending as well into the police department. And then the third item is just additional funding to cover cost overruns for siting and grading, mostly on the splash pad at Molinar Park. And that would complete this phase of the Molinar project. And there's still a second phase for 2025 in the long-term CIP would be additional work, but this would complete this phase. And that's another 21 request for $150,000.
Any questions about the
Madam Mayor?
change items?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Travis, thank you so much. Can you, for the benefit of the public, tell us what will qualify a car for being an abandoned vehicle?
Sure. Kim, do you want to address that? Thank you.
Council Pro Tem Sanchez, my name is Kim Smith. I'm with legal. Travis asked me to step in to answer any specific questions on the abandoned vehicles code. So there's a few statutes and our ordinance that come into play. Generally, an abandoned vehicle is a vehicle that is parked on the roadway for 24 hours. However, there is also a 48-hour notice period before any towing occurs. So in effect, it's a 72 hours. Generally, what we see is the vehicle's been parked for weeks before someone finally complains about it. And then at that point, it triggers that 48-hour notice period. It only applies to public streets. There are certain provisions where vehicles can be towed without notice. That's linked to inoperability or a hazard of some sort. But generally, it's a 48-hour notice period on top of a 24-hour prohibition.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that information. Well, we know the times that we're living in right now are really difficult for folks, and sometimes those policy violations can really present a hardship to folks. I'm wondering, are we taking any steps to be kind and compassionate in our response to? Absolutely, I agree. We need to make sure that our streets are clear and that there's no hazard in place for the public, but we also need to be mindful of the times we're living in. Are we taking any steps like that?
We are. So the entire process is entirely complaint generated. So police aren't roaming the neighborhoods looking for these sorts of violations. It's only if we get a call from a citizen or a business about a particular vehicle. If the vehicle, based on what's observed when officers get there, appears to be owned or possessed by a person experiencing homelessness or other similar issues, BPD has been in contact with Catch and our other community partners to try to reach out and provide whatever services are necessary to get the person operational and running again. I believe Catch delivered a car part recently to someone who the only reason their vehicle was operational was because there was a small part missing. So they coordinated to do that, to get the person going. So generally towing is a last resort, especially when we know that vehicle is the only option the person has.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions?
And just to clarify for people who are watching, those timelines are functions of state law. They're not our city ordinance. They're nothing that we have any policy direction over. So that's the state law and the state rules, not within the city of Boise. So I just want to make that clarifying comment and move to approve the interim budget changes as requested.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I would just also note that I appreciate the questions that Councilmember Sanchez added or asked tonight. I would note that this isn't a change in how we're enforcing this policy. It's simply a change in the administrative end of it so that there's less confusion. I'm hopeful that with this change, it will actually create opportunities for more of what you ask for rather than less, because it won't go back being shoved back and forth between two departments. It'll be in the purview of one department.
That's correct, Council President Clegg. The police bike unit is, I think, uniquely positioned with their connections with outreach groups and programs to provide maximum contact for that. And that's one of the real advantages of sending it back to police.
Thank you. Any other comments? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
all in favor, motion carries.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is internal audit FY22 work plan. Steve Rand, welcome, Steve.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and present a proposed work plan for fiscal year 2022.
Can you speak up a little bit, Steve? Thanks.
Yes, sorry. My purpose today is to present a proposed work plan for fiscal year 2022 to council and seek approval for that plan. To give you a little bit of background, annually we identify all operating divisions within a city as they appear on the loss and financial system, as well as a group of cross-functional activities that aren't isolated to any one department or division. This year, that totaled 89 separate targets of interest for us. Each one of those 89 was then rank ordered based on 5 factors: their financial impact, operating profile, staffing and technology, legal regulatory environment, and then areas of interest to us, to management, or to council members. The list is compiled and taken to audit committee each year, and final selections determined there. That occurred on August 24th this year. So the plan before you is a direct result of audit committee's provisional approval and input. We estimate we'll have approximately 4,800 effective hours that we can deploy to audit activities this next year. 2,200 of those hours will be consumed by our ongoing activities, our daily P card reviews, weekly check reviews, as well as monthly and quarterly activities that we engage in regularly and report to council. We have 8 standalone projects in addition to those recurring tasks that will consume the other 2,600 hours of staff time available. 2 of those are cross-functional as they appear on the list there: construction management and an ongoing review of COVID programs that the city will either administer or will pass down to subrecipients for administration. And then 6 standalone divisions, ranging from the security group at airport to utility maintenance, planning and development, building division. It'll be a fairly varied group of projects that we'll pursue. But that is the proposed plan as it stands today. I would be happy to address any questions or comments that Mayor and Council might have.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick note is all that myself and council leadership, which make up the audit committee, also delved into these quite deeply with Steve, and I feel quite comfortable with the work plan ahead. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Remember that this is the one department that is under our purview, And even as we approve this work plan today, for those council members who are not on the audit committee, it's always your ability to bring to leadership and audit committee members any suggested consulting for our audit, for our internal auditor.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve. I also want to thank you so much for entertaining the question that I posed to you during our last meeting about how we can incorporate the strategic approach to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion in the work of you as an auditor in your department. And I look forward to finding out what you think about that, because we do want that work throughout our organization. And I think when it comes to departments like audit, it might be difficult for people to imagine how that would work. So I look forward to more conversations about how that might happen.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, thank you. I appreciate your insights and your input during our audit committee meetings. And you always bring a non-audit observation and viewpoint to our processes. So we appreciate that. And it serves to keep us better and
Might be
improving all the time.
It might be a burly thing.
It may be. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We are looking for approval of the work plan.
Madam
Madam
Mayor.
Mayor,
Yes,
I move approval of the internal audit work plan for FY 2022.
Second,
moved and seconded. Any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
all in favor, motion carries.
thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. Item 3 on our agenda is animal fees. You'll all remember that during our budget workshop, we passed a motion directing DFA to explore ways to change our animal fees that would incent higher licensing. And I think Councilmember Thompson has some words for us based on the memos we got, and then we'll have some discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. It's another very exciting day. Anytime we get the chance to speak about humankind's greatest friend, the dog, it's another great day in council. So this is the final 2 animal-related proposals, specifically for dogs, that I'll be bringing forward in my tenure on your council. And this one in particular, though, the licensing one, is a complete team effort between Councilmember Bajent, Council President Clegg, and myself. And as you recall, we talked about a strategy to try to incentivize increasing dog licensing. And there's a good reason for that. While dog licensing certainly helps offset some of the costs associated with animal enforcement in our city, by far and away the most important reason to license your furry pal is to ensure that you can get him back home or her in case that they are lost. And with that tag, it certainly ensures much more success. So we do want to incentivize people to license their dog and encourage that to happen. So wanted to take a strategy, and thanks to 2 colleagues on my left and right, we developed this plan. And then thanks to Department of Finance Administration, City Clerk, and lots of heavy lifting as well by Councilmember Clegg, they came up with an analysis and answered those questions that we proposed to them as a council a month or so ago about costs, total potential projected revenue increases, staff time, those types of things. And they came back with 2 analysis that I'm hoping that council will come to a conclusion and decide which one they would like to pursue. And what each one does is, for the most part the same. It gives a no fee for the 6 months of all new licensees or new licenses or individuals that have lapsed in the past for the first 6 months of this program. After that, our program would cut in one scenario from $20 to $10 or $20 to $15, depending on the scenario you choose, for those that are spayed or neutered animals. And it would drop it from the mid-50s range for non-spayed neutered animals to either 30 or 35, depending on the scenario. And then also anyone that renews, that's currently in our system, renews would begin receiving a $25 discount, which in effect gets them to that same rate. It also assumes in each strategy a 30% compliance rate. So, which would be a very great compliance rate if we were to achieve it. It has happened in some cities, some different parts of the country, Calgary, and I think we can do it too. So that's the strategy here. It comes down to the two scenarios. One you'll see is certainly a bit more pricey and doesn't appear to result in revenues going forward. While the second scenario, which the difference between the two is one drops the price of the licensees from either $10 or the other one is 15. So when we don't drop it quite as much, we drop the license rates to 15 for spayed neutered and 35 for non-altered, then it does begin showing a revenue. I know this is hypothetical, but they did a good analysis, I believe, in the second scenario. I want to hand it over to Councilmember Clegg to see if you have anything to add to that.
Sure, thank you. So Councilmember Thompson and I met with DFA and met with each other to go over these and make sure that we were getting the information that got us to the goal that we had set forth. I think with a little bit of adjustment from what our first proposal was, these two scenarios do get us to that goal. As Councilmember Thompson mentioned, one is a bit more expensive, and I can't at this point be confident that it will bring us more licensees. And so while, you know, this is up for discussion, I guess if I was going to make a recommendation, it would seem like we'd go with the one that's a little less expensive, monitor the results, see if they get us to the goal that we have of getting 30% of the animals registered. Right now we're at 18%. We can't find a city anywhere that's more than the 30% goal that we set. So it's actually a pretty aggressive goal, come to think of it, you know, as you analyze it, but we think that it's possible with the outreach that's been proposed.
And Madam Mayor, that'd be my same recommendation for scenario two.
So discussion on this portion of it. There's also, of course, an outreach portion. You've got a memo on that. And then Councilmember Thompson has some additional things that he'd like us to think about both now and going forward.
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Bajan.
You know, we all got the information ahead of time and we've seen the different scenarios in the breakouts, and they're a little complicated, but I think the main takeaway is that scenario two is a one-time upfront cost, and then at least in theory, revenue positive. So it continues to generate revenue to pay for our programs. And that's pretty palatable to me. The other thing that I would, I guess, just note is that, you know, I've always been a little unsure about dog licensing in Boise because I understand the purpose, which is to reunite people with their pets and to allow our code enforcement people and the Humane Society who partners with us to identify whose animals are whose. But it's sort of one of these situations where technology has overtaken that old way of doing it. People now microchip their dogs. Every veterinarian's office, every Petco has a scanner. There are other ways of identifying it. And I appreciate that Councilmember Thompson has incorporated those other ways of identifying an animal's owner into both our licensing scheme and into our database for who owns what animals, because, you know, nobody actually knows, but it's just very difficult for me to imagine that in 20 years or 30 years, a city maintained dog licensure system is actually going to be the best way to reunite pets with their owners. And so I appreciate that both of his options, including option two, which I think is the best, leaves enough wiggle room and opens up the possibility that we may continue to transition into something even more efficient in the future.
Thank you, Councilmember and Madam Mayor. If I may add, so if we do move forward with that scenario, there are two other items I would ask you just to consider whether you do them in the future, whether I'm here or not. or that we asked to incorporate them at this time, are other ways that we could incentivize licensing and in effect help the animal reunite to the owner. And that's a microchip discount. Many cities, I listed several examples, Washington, Caldwell actually, and a place in Oregon have provided discounts if you microchip your animal. To make it less burdensome, it would be on an honor system, would be one idea, and it could provide anywhere between $1, $10, $2. That's what Caldwell gives. And it would just be a box that they check if they have their dog microchipped. Again, it could be based on the honor system. The other one, and I know Councilmember Sanchez has asked about this last time, is the low income discount. This has had great success in Minneapolis. And they give a 50% discount to households where they reach a certain level of income. Could be covering HUD low income level and below, which is 80%. So 80% of median income would qualify, something along those lines, but it would probably require more insight discussion from you. But those are two other options I just wanted to put out there. And if interested, they are not incorporated into that scenario too. So they would be new ideas. And lastly, I don't want to forget to mention, Councilmember Whittings, you brought up the great idea of auto licensing to have it just re-up automatically unless they turn it off. That's something that they have to continue to look into because it's not as easy as it might seem. So it is one of those, in that last paragraph after the second scenario, there's some things that they're going to continue to look into, and that's one of them. So I just want to put those out there before I bring up my final proposal.
And I might add, there's also work being done to look at the way that we enforce both the licensing and also various citations around animals. And while it will likely be after Councilmember Thompson has left the council, I look forward to working on potentially changing some of the way that we do that enforcement to make it more aligned with the goal of incentivizing licensing rather than being a punitive major. For instance, one of the things that the clerk's office is looking into is making sure that the handheld device that our animal officers have has the capacity to license a dog on the spot. And so if you pick up a dog, rather than issue a citation, you could issue a license. So there's a variety of things they're working at, but were not something that they could bring forward in this month that we had. Shall we take a motion and a vote on the scenarios first and then get into the rest of it?
Yes, absolutely. Madam Mayor, I'd move that we move ahead with scenario 2 and see it happen.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to commend everyone who's put in so much work and thought into this. I think that Councilmember Thompson has just a lot of heart for animals and really wants to see this work for the pets and the owners in our city. And I know that it's been a real heavy lift and a huge passion project. So well done. And thank you for bringing this to us.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councilmember Thompson, for working on this. I think if there's anything we've learned over the past 18 months is the powerful role that our animals play in our lives. I think, didn't we run out of animals for people to adopt at some point? So thank you so much for highlighting the very important role that they play in our quality of life. I got my cat Murray about 13 years ago, something like that, at the Humane Society, and he was chipped. And I think the Eaton's good at my house, so I haven't lost him. He hasn't wandered off too far. But I've often wondered about how long those chips last. Like, at what point do they become obsolete? So I like that there might be an added assurance that we would be able to locate our pet and have them returned to us if for some reason that chip became obsolete and didn't work. I don't know how likely that is, but we used to buy CDs and now we don't. So thank you for your work on this.
One last note, I had this in my notes and I didn't mention it. The other thing that the clerk's office is going to look into is other ways to make licensing a benefit. And one of those potentially could be looking to allow our animal control officers to actually return a dog, at least make one attempt to return a dog if they have a license versus taking them to the shelter. So as we've said, more to come on this, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
since our Parks Director is sitting here, another option along those lines that we can think about is early morning or late evening off leash in certain parks, particularly we're having waterfowl issues for licensed animals only. That may be another way to nudge people towards licensure.
Yeah. Certainly. Okay. Any further discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
again, I want to thank Councilmember Bajent and yourself. This was a 100% 3% effort. Thank you for your outstanding ideas, Patrick. And anyways, and I love the passion you show them for it. I feel very happy to pass this baton as I leave City Hall. I do want to say, these other two ideas that I noted, the 50% and that I know the microchip is much easier to implement if we were to have interest. I'll just leave it at that, but I won't make a motion on those two because I support them. I would want to know that there's additional support, but if not, I can leave those two with council in your lap as potential future ideas.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, you certainly have my support and certainly willing to continue to bring these types of animal issues to the table and to have your ear if you ever want to, lend it this direction. I do appreciate Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg's suggestion of really looking at that carrot instead of a stick. We did something similar several years ago when it came to issuing tickets to people who didn't have rear lights on their bicycles, and the police officers carried around lights and gave them to people. Since so many people don't actually know what the rules are. And so there was that wonderful education component. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to really use that education and opportunity and technology, to kind of get people on board, but certainly happy to keep pushing, keep carrying on.
Thank you. I guess I would make one comment on both the microchip and the low income discount. I think they're both great ideas. I've heard from the clerk's office that implementing the change that they are going to implement is going to be a relatively heavy lift. They'll have to make changes in process. And I guess I would suggest that it might make the most sense to let that play out, see how it rolls out. I suspect we'll be making some changes at the end of it anyway. And by then we could have more information, especially on the low income discount. The other thing I've begun to think, and I think Councilmember Bajent can speak to this as well, is that we have a variety of ways that we treat various of our residents who fall below the poverty level in the city. And over the next year, we could make a concerted effort to really consolidate that into a coherent policy and try to make sure that in all of the places where we do that, we try to do it in the same way, which I'm not sure we do today. So I guess from my vantage point, I think the action we just took is a great start. I think the education that's going to come along with this action, and at the end of the year, maybe the one thing I would offer is that we direct staff, as we do on many new things, to come back to us in a year with a review and a report. And at that point, we can look for further action.
I concur.
Madam Mayor, I also concur. I would just add, as we're giving direction, that I don't know our system and I don't know what work is needed on the back end, but difficult to imagine that the microchip discount in particular is that burdensome. And maybe there are things that I don't understand, but if it's an on or checkbox that reduces your fee, it really is worth pushing and exploring that, because the fundamental purpose of licensure is to identify people's pets. People who have undertaken to microchip their pets have already done that work. We're essentially requiring them to duplicate work and duplicate expense in ways that, for the ultimate purpose, reuniting with your pet, are not necessary. And so just from my perspective, there's a little bit of maybe extra onus on us to get that ironed out, because it really isn't fair to be requiring people to do again what they've already done one time.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Sanchez.
one thing I've observed is people who are living in poverty, who are pet owners, they will seek out assistance for their pet before they will seek out assistance for themselves. I remember during the last recession, I was pleased to find out that the Humane Society had a food pantry for animals. And I made sure to make sure that my cat had food. I had no problem seeking that assistance out for Murray. I would never do that for myself. I would never go to the food bank and ask for a box of food. So I just want us to be aware of just how important animals are to people. And if there's a way for us to assist them to make sure that they provide a good quality of life for their animal, that we create that avenue. And it may be that we subsidize that. I mean, we just want to make sure that people have those resources available to them. And it's been my own experience that we put our animals first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move on to my next proposal, and I'll be quick about it, as I know how much time we're allotted. It looks like you have something you might want to say, Doug. If you okay, you're okay. You might have something to say on this one. So we'll see. This one I'm very excited about. So I've been in contact with citizens in our city that have brought this to my attention in having these hot asphalt warning signs placed within the city, primarily within parks. It's been done. I put several examples in the memo with a cute pup and showing how hot the asphalt actually is depending on the air temperature, just to serve as a educational campaign when someone's out with their pet, that they realize just how quick the paws can be burnt, and sometimes severely in a short amount of time. And these would be in strategic places and a phase strategy. And I want to thank Doug and his staff for helping put that strategy in place. Well, I mean, hypothetically in this memo. And I think it's a good one. It hits, they did a great job of looking at where the asphalt is and where these could be placed and how many. They did an estimate on the costs. And then lastly, I threw in some additional potential places such as City Hall West, and perhaps around Quinn's Pond and Esther Simplot Park and Veterans Park for a few additional signs. This would be a one-time expense, and I propose it would be in the range of $10,000 to $15,000 is all, one time, with these permanent signs, which would be designed by our CE team, or the mayor's CE team. They do an outstanding job. And hopefully it would look somewhat like one of the ones I gave in the example, which I think really catch the eye. So that's the proposal. I wanted to see if there's support to move forward, and it would come out of the Council Strategic Initiative Fund, one time.
Comments?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I do support these signs. I think we should do it. And here's why. We revised the animal code to make it a violation of city ordinances to do things that are reasonably harmful to your pet in public. And it would be a bummer to cite or otherwise criminalize people's behavior without giving them a reasonable opportunity to know what's against the law. And I think the asphalt awareness with canines in particular is less well understood than it should be. This is a relatively modest expense. We have it in the strategic initiatives budget, and I support doing it now.
Welcome, Madam Mayor. I'll turn this over to you.
Thanks. I'm still letting you be in charge. Why don't you finish this one out?
I can make a motion.
I guess I was going to ask, was that a motion, or does someone want to make one?
Yeah, I move to do everything I just suggested, which is approve Councilmember Thompson's request for $10,000 to $15,000 one-time expenditure for hot asphalt awareness signs and locations that he outlined in his memo.
Madam Mayor, could I add one potential amendment? That it would be for the 15,000, which we may not use all of, and that I'd ask just the Doug, if Parks Department, if they could look at those additional ideas for possibly around 6 more signs to be covered as well. And with that, I second that motion, if you accept that.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right. Well, next up, we have Doug. Welcome, Doug. And when you were standing up there, I thought you'd already started this. To talk about the undeveloped park sites. And I just want council to know and the public to know too, that I asked Doug Holloway and his Parks and Rec team to come present information on our undeveloped park sites. The city and our residents deserve to know what the status of these park parcels is and what plans or funding, if any, the city has to develop them. You know, in the last couple of months, it's become clear that handshake deals potentially from the past have made the status of these parcels unclear and in some ways, in some cases, complicated. So this is our first step of investigating the status, trying as a council and with me to understand where we're at. If there are things and discussions that were held that we don't know about that we need to find, the status of impact fees and everything else so that it's clearly laid out there for all of us. And then I've also asked staff to analyze parks and open space to ensure that permanent protections are in place for future generations. And with that, Doug's here to start the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. The only thing that people love more than their parks are their dogs. So I will go ahead and put that out there, Councilmember Thompson. And if you don't believe that, go to Dog Island at any time during the day at Ann Morrison Park. And you'll see 30, 40, 50 people frolicking with their dogs in that location. So it's a good marriage between parks and dogs. So thank you, Madam Mayor, for teeing that up. Yes, Mayor has asked that we come back with periodic updates on the various undeveloped sites that we have in our inventory and what the status is, current status is of when those sites would be developed. So today, the focus of our presentation is to look at each of those park sites, where they're located, essentially how long we've had the sites, how large they are, what the timeline is in potentially developing or proposed timeline in developing those sites and or going through the phased greenup and adding amenities. And then we also analyzed what we would consider the impact of the 10-minute walk mission, which is a vision and now a current standard that we have in our department. And this is something that we signed on to with the National Recreation and Park Association, along with, as you see, a number of other communities across the country, to try to create a park within a 10-minute walk of every household within the city limits of the city of Boise. And we currently are at about 63% of our households right now in the entire city limits only that are within that 10-minute walk, which at first glance seems like a pretty good number. We want to be at 100% though. And I think that's why updates like we're providing today continue to stay out in front of council as we look at how we will fund getting some of these park sites that haven't been developed, getting them developed. And I will show you how we used the science, and it is a complicated formula that we utilize in our GIS system to determine how that 10-minute walk or how each park that's developed affects that 10-minute walk. And it really is based on a number of factors, certainly the location of the park, the neighborhoods surrounding the park, but more importantly, it is the access points into the park. And so when you see a park that has just one access point to it, it's going to serve fewer residents than if we have multiple access points to the park. And so the 10-minute walk formula and how that's calculated is fairly complicated in looking at not only the site, the size, the neighborhood around the park, but also really looks at how many points of contact that you can actually get into the park. For the purposes of this presentation, Madam Mayor and council members, most of the sites we'll show you today are, we're proposing Greenup phases and the timeline for the Greenup phases. And to just refresh everyone's memory, a Greenup phase is where the first phase of a park that we have in our asset that we will provide the turf, the landscape, all the parking, any pathways or sidewalks that are included in the master plan, and then restroom facilities. And so that's our current standard of greening up a park. And then as funding continues to become available down the road, whether that be impact fee or general fund, then the amenities are added back in. And those amenities, as you're aware, would be things like playgrounds and shelters, sports fields, splash pads, and things like that. So for most of what we'll talk about today will be really centered on that green up phase piece that we'll be proposing to council. And I want to point out as well that even though we have dates on some of these projects that are out a little ways, we are sticking to our capital improvement plan, which bases our development of parks space on impact fees and impact fees collected. So the proposal you see today are us assuming that we'll get the impact fees when they come in and we have adequate amount of impact fees, then we would propose when the park would be to be greened up and then amenities would follow that. Council, at your it's within obviously your purview to add general fund dollars, to change those schedules, to change those priorities. We just put it in to follow the CIP, which is impact fees will pay their way with the park development. So I just want to make sure that what you'll see today, we're just proposing. It's up to the mayor and council to really look at sticking to that timeline. And do you want to augment that with maybe general fund dollars? So the first site up is in Southwest Boise, and we call this our Saringa Park site because it's in the Saringa project development. It also has been referred to as the Coughlin site. This was a complex purchase trade arrangement that happened back in 2006. And it also included, I believe, the Bora parcel that we'll talk about here in a little bit was also included at the same time during this transaction. Dr. Coughlin was an orthopedic surgeon in Boise, and I believe he originally owned the property out at Cole and Lake Hazel Road. So it's about 10 acres. It's been a moving target for us in this development in that the development itself has continued to change hands with developers, but also some of the adjustments that continue to happen to the project have made it tough to actually pin down where the park is going to end up being located. There's also an elementary school that will be developed within this housing project as well. So we have had pretty good luck with our Collister, our Shadow Hills locations where we have park sites that are contiguous to school districts. And so we've kind of piggybacked on where the school is going to end up. Do we want to look at something that's more closely related to that site? The information on this is really, it's very interesting. In our files, we don't have a lot of information on this. And I appreciate the mayor mentioning that there's more research that needs to be done on some of these sites. And on this one in particular, our legal team is doing some extensive title research to get more details on it. But at this point, we have very little on the transaction. There is a 2016 updated project on our website, city website in planning and development services that does call out the city park to be named Kirsten Coughlin Park. And so we're working on what that's supposed to entail, but unfortunately in the file we have for this particular park, we don't have that information available to us. Doesn't mean that it wasn't in any of the in documents that possibly could be uncovered through the title search. But at this point, that's the only Kirsten Coughlin Park is the only notation that I found, and it's in a document that's actually on the city website. So we will develop this park. The timeline is really based upon what happens with the project. So we'll follow it closely. And obviously we'll bring that back to council as that continues to move forward. And as far as what the park will look like, there hasn't been a master plan done on it, so we need to do that. And right now we're anticipating that in 2028, there would be funding available through impact fees to be able to green that site up. But again, based upon how the project itself moves forward. The 10-minute walk, it is impact fee eligible. So the green up would be about $2 million and would be paid with impact fees. 10-minute walk analysis based on the project development now, it would add another 122 households to our vision in getting every household in the city within that 10-minute walk.
Doug, my memory is that this park site was not at the corner of Cole and Lake Hazel, but it was interior to the project.
Yes, Madam Mayor, Council President Clay, correct. And it's moved around actually, depending on the developer we have worked with. And I think the original agreement that I inherited is that we would have some fluidity with this and flexibility on where it ends up. I believe the school district, Council President, has determined where they want their school site to be. I don't know if that's changed in the last year, but I believe it is at a corner. I don't know if it's at this particular site.
So we're following that.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. So I have a question about, the impact fees are what kickstarts the work on these sites, in theory.
Yeah, so Madam Mayor, Council President, or excuse me, Council Pro Tem Sanchez, it's so growth is to pay for itself when it comes to parks, fire stations, fire and police. And on park sites, developers pay into a fund that is that we can utilize to build parks to keep up with the growth that the development that they are building has impact on our community. Theoretically, we have not always collected 100% of the impact fees. In fact, we have just started collecting 100% within the last few years. But theoretically, you're to collect the full amount of impact fee that would pay for the entire growth. So again, theoretically, we would be able to build parks out of in planning areas, and this is the Southwest planning area, from impact fees that developers have paid for the potential impact of growth. So it should pay 100%, and our CIP is predicated on it paying 100%. That's why the Greenup for this is 2028, because we don't anticipate getting enough funds in the impact fee account in Southwest to be able to pay for the Greenup of this until that time. So it's a collection process. As development continues to occur, we build up the account, and then we put it in the CIP based upon when the money would be available that we would be able to pay for it. But also we have to look at other priorities in that account and also look at work plans for our own team and what's coming up in that 2028 time range in order to be sure that if we put it in there, that we're able to get it done.
Okay, just a quick follow-up, Madam Mayor. So in terms of priority, it could be a fire station over a park.
Madam President, or excuse me, Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem, no, those are separate collected impact fee buckets. So fire gets its amount, police gets its amount, and then parks gets our amount. So it's exclusively for park development only.
Thank you for clarifying that. And so in terms of building out a park, a site like that, that would not happen, let's say, concurrently with a development happening. It might happen afterwards.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, yes.
Okay.
More than likely, the funding wouldn't be available to do that. We've only done that on a couple of park sites. The Bowler site, which we just cut the ribbon on here 6-7 weeks ago, was a full development with Greenup and amenities at the same time.
Great, thank you, Doug.
Madam Mayor, a quick, when we do the 10-minute walk estimate, is that, or the analysis, is that based on existing homes or projected home? Like this site in particular is going to look really different in 2028 because of its location and the Mcgradio development, that's Mcgradio family development, the Murio project, all this stuff that's going on is going to really change those numbers. Do we build that in, or is this just based on what's there now?
Yeah, this is because there is, excuse me, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bajent, this is based on what we think that area will look like at that time, based upon the latest project plans that we have seen. So it's looking in the crystal ball. This number, my guess is this number is going to go up from 122 households based upon how this project progresses.
And that's going to be true of all of these. The 10-minute walk analysis is a projection based roughly on the timeline that we're looking at for Greenup.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Council Member Bajent, actually, we do have actual data on some of these as I go through these, and I can show that, demonstrate that to you. And actually, we're looking at the houses that are already there, and here's how many households it will provide by building that site out. So we'll get to that.
Thank you.
So our next one is our Pierce Park site. This is at the very top part of Pierce Park Lane. We purchased this in 2015 from a local architect. It's about 2.1 acres, and it's just below the 29 acres that we just purchased at Foothills property from the Pursley family that council approved that purchase sale agreement, I believe, a week ago. So it's in a great spot. As you can see, it would add 90 households in the 10-minute walk at that location. And that's primarily the households that are, I guess, would be to the west of the site. The Greenup is estimated at $400,000, and we believe we could get this greened up in 2024. There are no restrictions or commitments in the file, so we look pretty good at moving forward with that in doing the outreach in 2023 and then adding this construction in 2024. So Hal Park, this is one of our latest donation that will be a ribbon of jewel. Aaron and Sue Hal purchased this property in 2018 and then donated it to the city with the deed restriction that it would always be a park and nothing else, and that it would be named after Sue. We have been working closely with the land or with the donor on some possible not only donations from the family, but some fundraising opportunities to help get the Greenup phase done a little sooner than 2030. But right now, the impact fees, it is impact fee eligible. We would have an adequate amount in 2030 to be able to cover the $3.2 million that it would cost to do this. It's about 16 acres. And if you're not familiar with this site, it's actually a pretty cool site. It's right on the Greenbelt and on the river. And it's just below, that's Highway 21 that you see there at the top of it. And the only issue with this is there are no sidewalks, no pathways. There's nothing that connects anyone to this site at this time. There are some houses being developed across Warm Springs, but there's no even crosswalk to get people across that location to this site. So we will do this analysis once we get the master plan completed, adopted, and have a plan to get it greened up, that we will do the analysis to see, by adding the sidewalks and adding more connectivity other than from the Greenbelt, what additional households this would cover. Spalding Ranch, we threw this in because it still has some undeveloped pieces, but I think we've been updating council. We were here in the springtime to give you an update. I think after we planted the fruit trees, which was per the master plan. So we're implementing those pieces of the plan. We are planning in 2023 to get what we refer to as a drive aisle through the property, so that now we can get our farmers that we will be initiating contracts with. We can get them all over the site now. And we're in the process this year of completing all of the irrigation systems. So we have access to water. We just need to get the water from its point of entry out to all the different parts of the property. And we're working on that actually this year. And then once we get the road in, then we'll be able to really get, the goal is to get plants in the ground by 2023. We're still amending the soil at this point in time to get it ready to plant. But a lot of progress is happening almost on a daily basis out there. We have about $1 million in impact fees that's been allocated. And there's another $3 million that would be allocated between 2023 and 2026 for this site. And so it's exciting to see things are starting to happen, but I will tell you, Madam Mayor and council members, that this definitely is going to start looking like a farm in the next about 18 months. And we're real excited to see that. We've got a number of partnerships in the community that are extremely excited to have an opportunity to educate and grow crops at this site. So it's really going to turn out the way you all envisioned it to turn out. The buildings themselves are going to require a lot of work and a lot of funding. We have had conversations with a number of companies in town that appear to be very excited about partnering with some donation opportunities and fundraising opportunities. So there'll be more on that to come. The 10-minute walk analysis, we had already done that on this site, and it does add 529 households to this location. It is very dense. There's a lot of houses that are around this area. And again, it was acquired in 2016. And if you recall, it was a trade with Local Construct that traded for property that we have down on Main and Fairview for this property here. So it's been in our inventory since then, and about 20 acres, and we're excited to see things starting to occur out there.
Madam Mayor. Doug, just before you get too far, I was going to ask you on the Hal Park if we had an estimate of when we were going to start or finish the master plan, or if we knew that yet.
We, Madam Mayor, Council Member Halliburton, we have not done the master plan yet on this site. The donor did hire an outside firm to do one for him. And we'll probably take pieces of that to look at. And it really was creating his vision of what he wanted to see in the park. But some of that may not work or happen as quickly as he would like, or may have some maintenance issues moving down the road. So I think Aaron just had this broad view. He wanted to see this. He had this real interesting vision, and he went out and hired someone and said, "Here's my vision," and bring that back. So there was very little community engagement, and that's really what our forte is when we develop a master plan. So that still needs to be done for this site.
And Madam Mayor, just quick follow-up. Do we have an estimate of when we think we might start that master planning process, or is it really not on the schedule yet?
So Madam Mayor, Council Member Halliburton, the public outreach timeline I put is 2028. Give us about an 18-month to 2-year window before we would have the opportunity for the Greenup in 2030. So we want to give that kind of space when we feel like when we have a date we can do the Greenup. If for some reason this would be expedited, then we would just kick that out maybe another year ahead. So if we could do something with this site in 2024, we would do planning in 2022 and 2023.
Great, perfect.
Alta Harris Park site. This is in the Harris Ranch Development, Southeast Planning and Barber Valley Planning area. It's at South Eckert Road, right along the Boise River. This has been in more or less even though we didn't have possession of the property, it's been considered an asset of the city since the original agreement was done in 2008 to create a park site at this location that would be a ribbon of jewel, and it would be named after the matriarch of the Harris family, Alta. The site was officially conveyed to the city in 2018 and will be has to be a park site in perpetuity per deed restrictions, and also will be named after Alta. We have done all the public outreach on this park and created a master plan. We had a plan to do the Greenup in 2020, but the cost came in significantly higher than the impact fees, which this is impact fee eligible, that we had available. And so it was put off. And now our timetable is looking at 2025 and it would be a full build out. And that's the agreement we have with the Harrises, is it wouldn't be a Greenup and then an amenities down the road. It would be a full build out. And per the agreement, the build out needs to occur by 2025. So we have between now and then to figure out our funding mechanism with our impact fees. It may require, and I put the note there, some general fund resources to get us to that finish line by 2025. But this is something we hear from weekly from the neighborhood out there when it's going to occur. So right now, it appears it would not happen before 2025. The 10-minute analysis, 636 households would be added if this park, when this park is developed. So the Gary Lane Fire and Park Parcel in Northwest Boise on Gary Lane. This was acquired in 2008, and originally, as council knows, I think all too well, the long history of this parcel. It was originally acquired to be a fire station. Then our fire department decided to move that station over to our Magnolia Park before it was developed. That appeared to not be the exact location they wanted a fire station. So then Pierce Park property was purchased on Pierce Park Lane for a fire station. And then it was determined that, well, maybe Gary Lane is a good site for the fire station. So it came back to being a fire station. And you asked, could we still make this like a combination location where it would be the fire station, but it would also have public park components. And so that's how it sits today. Madam Mayor, as you and council members are aware, our fire department, our chief is looking at the whole Northwest area and looking at where the best location is to sit a fire station. We don't know if that's here or at another location. So at this point in time, we've got to be determined construction and timeline on construction and public outreach due to the uncertainty of what exactly is going to happen here. But I believe council has said it'll be either both or one or the other. And so we just need to see when that actually does occur. It is impact fee eligible. The Greenup on this site, it's about $490,000. And we threw in a little extra money, I believe about $120,000. So to not only do the Greenup, but on this one, potentially to do some amenities here as well at this site. The 10-minute walk analysis, and this is really an interesting number. So look at the size of this park. It's 1.4 acres, but to tell you, but to really get a grasp of the density here, it adds almost 1,100 households to our 10-minute walk analysis. And I think this plays right into Council President Clegg's push that even small micro parks in dense areas can have huge impact on our citizens. And this is a perfect example of adding almost 1,100 households with such a small location. Really is a big win when we have an initiative and a standard of that 10-minute walk.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Is this an example of a project that would be concurrent, like the park would be built concurrent with the project, the development?
So Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, so this is a vacant lot that we have on Gary Lane. So there's nothing else that would be happening. It's completely built out with homes all the way around it and across the street as well. And the Kensington apartments are just kitty corner, very close to this location as well. So it really is us developing a park, and it is impact fee eligible. And we do have impact fees available in this account that could speed this up if that was Mayor and Council's wishes, depending on what our fire department folks end up doing.
Yeah, I had a question too. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Doug. This picture brings up a question, and it relates to green space that's internal to existing subdivisions. I know that a lot of these subdivisions were built out with some green space that's kind of private for the folks who live there. Are we taking any of that into account when we look at the analysis of the access that people have to green space around the city?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, we are not currently calculating in the 10-minute walk. I believe we've gone back and forth on whether schools and whether homeowners association parcels should be included in that, because it is open space, it is access to green space. The standard right now we're looking at, I believe that we've settled in on, is just our park sites. But I think that an argument can be made, even though there's like a school site wouldn't be available to you at 10 o'clock on a Monday during the school year, but it would be at 3:30. And so that's the only rub we've had in adding those in, is it's not full access, but it is an opportunity to provide potentially additional households when we start throwing in school sites and we start throwing in common area locations within developments.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, the argument I would make for specifically the common sites and developments is we give developers additional density in exchange for amenities like green space, like tot lots and that type of thing. And so my argument would be, we've given something in exchange for public good. That public good is something that's accessible to those residents. And it would make sense, I think, in that case, because we've given something, they've given something in return, that would be potentially counted in that 10-minute calculation. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have parks all over the city by any means, but just to show that, to give an actual representation of access that people have to open space.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, that's a great point. The only argument I've heard from some of those neighborhoods is that they don't want the public coming into their area, so it would be limited to just their immediate subdivision. Newer developments, though, I think we have you have that opportunity to say, let's develop something that is at a higher standard, that is like a park, and that would be accessible to not only your subdivision, but also to the public in general. And you get that out front from the beginning. And we get something in our inventory that meets the standard our citizens are expecting.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just to follow up on that, we actually did that on a development not too long ago in Southwest Boise, where there was an opportunity to have some open space, and we made sure in the conditions that that was publicly accessible. So I think that's a really great point that we should do going forward. Thank you, Doug, for that
Thank you.
discussion.
Madam Mayor, I hadn't actually thought of Councilmember Wooding's point before. It's a really good one that we're trading, and it never occurred to me. The only thing I wanted to add to it is this particular site is a really good example of the kind of concern or the kind of thinking that Councilmember Wooding's brought up, because River Glen Junior High School is right there, and the open space there is, I mean, if you're familiar, it's easily 10, 12 times bigger than whatever our park would be. And so I don't know that we need to like break or change our formulas, but I think that's relevant to know. And that kind of fact is relevant to know as we think about prioritizing or moving things around. You know, this community on North Gary Lane is in fact very served by some form of open space. They can access it, you know, during recess, but there's open space there that can be used by this community. It's much larger than our proposed park site. That kind of soft factor may affect how we think about ranking, particularly if we're talking about general fund dollars, how we think about ranking some of these other sites. So I just wanted to say out loud that at least that's part of the thinking in my mind.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I guess quick comment and then a question. So I guess one thing, just as we're talking about this related subject, the nice thing about having it be a park and not something that goes with the development is there typically is a master planning process that involves the neighborhood, the neighbors in the area, so that they do have the ability to have some input, versus if a development's coming in, there's not quite as much public engagement around what that park may look like, bathrooms, splash pads, other different types of things there. And so I guess that's just one thing that I think about, is it like, what a great opportunity whenever there is going to be a park in the neighborhood to get that master planning process going. And if we were really looking at it from a development standpoint, and what we're asking them to do would be figuring out how then do you involve neighbors kind of creating the vision that they want to see. So I guess that's my comment. My question, Doug, and I apologize for asking you to do another estimate, is when we're looking at a timeline at a site like this, we've got a fire department that's actively looking for a new space right now, and they're doing it. They're making that a really large priority to do sooner than later. And so when we're looking at a site like this, and we know that this one may be on the table or may be somewhere else, but we also know that they're actively looking, and we know that we have impact fees that are potentially eligible. This could be a park site that we would see happening not in like a 2030 time range, but in a closer time range as soon as we figure out what the fire department is going to do. Am I understanding that correctly?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, I really am hesitant to get carts before horses,
Sure.
because I don't know what the fire department is really doing. But if this was not a site the fire department was interested in the future, and I don't know that, then yes, I think that we could come back to council and say this could be a site that could be expedited. We have to weigh that in with other priorities that may have sat longer in this list, and then look and make sure that that we're being fair to all the different planning areas in the city. So there's other factors to look at, but I think your comment is correct.
Yeah, thank you for answering that in a way that's actually possible to answer. Thanks, Doug.
Okay. The Mcgradio Site, I think you're all very, very familiar with this, in Southwest Boise. It is bordered between South Cole and Maple Grove. Goes completely across between those two streets. Acquired by the department in 1998. It was acquired sooner than that by the airport. 157 acres. And then just an update, we have been working with outside counsel that does specific FAA guidance, and works with the FAA very closely on just what, if there are any restrictions, if there are any issues with this continuing to move forward with whatever the city decides to do at this site. And we don't have those details worked out with the outside counsel yet. Obviously, Madam Mayor and council members will be the first to hear that, but I think it's getting fairly close. If, depending on what council's direction is, we are committed, just like we would with any other park site, to work closely with the neighborhood associations that are out in that southwest area to work on a park design, work on how it would sit, what the timing would be, the scope of the site, and also what the size of the park could end up being. Again, that's directed by you, Mayor and Council, not by our department. I know you know our commitment to how we do these things. As Councilmember Halliburton pointed out, we do perform a robust public outreach. So when we're ready to make those moves, we would be prepared to be able to do that. So construction timeline obviously would be determined by all those other factors. And the Greenup and amenity costs, again, will be driven by what that park design and neighborhood outreach ends up looking like. The 10-minute walk analysis as it sits today, with no development on this site but a park, adds 467 households to the 10-minute walk. If indeed all those households were annexed into the city, that would be the caveat to this, because the initiative is based on houses within the city limits, not outside the city limits. So any questions on this? So we actually have 3 other Southwest Boise sites that we have in our inventory. Fox Ridge is at the south end of 5 Mile Road. This was acquired in 1995. It's 24 acres, and I believe, according to what we can see in the files, it was provided. We did purchase it, and we purchased it from the homeowners association at that location. So there are some covenants that related to the neighborhood association that would provide some restrictions on how we use the property. And so we're working through those at this point in time, if indeed this was annexed into the city and it was earmarked for a Greenup or future development. But again, it's located outside, so there has been no master plan that's been done on it. And so no construction timeline or funding mechanism. As it sits today, if it was developed, it would add 220 households if it was annexed into the city to our 10-minute walk initiative. The Pearl Jensen site, also outside the city limits in Southwest Boise. This one was treated a little bit differently. There was a master plan and community outreach done on this. It was acquired in 2000. It's 62 acres. Similar to Spalding Ranch, it's a farming homestead. The Jensen family discounted the price of the property to the city under the condition that it would always be a park. So there is a deed restriction that it will be a park, and it would be named after Pearl Jensen. No construction timeline or cost funding mechanism, as again, it sits outside the city limits, so it would be mayor and council's wishes on how they would want to move this forward. The 10-minute walk analysis does add 604 more households, though, to our 10-minute walk initiative.
Madam Mayor. Doug, 2 questions. So you mentioned that similar to the Spalding site, it currently has irrigation and farming capacity. So have we thought, even outside the city, whether that is a valuable asset, maybe in terms of urban farming?
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, I believe it is. We currently do lease a portion of it out for farming purposes. I'm not sure what they're growing on it or utilizing it for.
You know, on top of that, then the question would be, would that meet the covenant that it be a park site if it were an urban farm? You know, if we developed it as an urban farm.
Yep, Madam Mayor, Council President, I'll go back and look at that to see if there's any specific language in the restriction that would. My initial thought is that it would be okay to do that. It was a farm for several generations, so I'm assuming that would be okay. But we could certainly look at that, Council President.
And then finally, does the deed restriction allow? I always understood that if this ever did end up in the city, we might look at a fire station here. Does the deed restriction allow that?
Madam Mayor, Council President, I'd have to look at that as
Okay.
well. I'm not sure of that, so I'll need to look at that and see.
Just, yeah, questions. And sorry, I know that we're late.
Yeah, I just realized we are running late. I don't know how many more slides you've got, Doug.
I just got a couple, Madam Mayor, and I could just run quickly through them. This is the other southwest side. It's called Wrigley. Again, you see when it was acquired, it's outside the city limits. The Bora Park parcel, 4.6 acres acquired in 2006. And we're currently looking at doing a public outreach on that piece, but we want to do it in coordination with our PDS team, which is working on a neighborhood association master plan. And that's slated to start in 2025. So we would just mirror that to come up with what the neighborhood would like to see on that additional 4.6 acres. And it is impact fee eligible. The Mcgradio parcel, again, 6 acres, undeveloped. For the life of me, Madam Mayor and council members, I don't know why we didn't go ahead and develop this additional 6 acres when we built the park, but it never did get developed. And so, as you're aware, it's named after Chuck Mcgradio. And but we're talking about maybe a FY26 construction timeline to go ahead and green up that additional 6 acres, and it is impact fee eligible and does not add any additional, but you can see the park itself added almost 1,300 different households. Liberty Park, this is currently under a life estate to finish off this 2.6 acres. So we don't have a timeline on when we will be greening that up.
And I just want to clarify that that's because a family member's living on the property, correct?
Yes, Mrs.
Yeah.
Ryther, who we purchased the property from, has a life estate to stay there indefinitely until she chooses to no longer.
Yeah.
And then the final one, Madam Mayor's Warren Springs parcel. This is an interesting one. It's just a natural area that we've taken out neighborhood outreach on a number of occasions, and the neighborhood is really interested in seeing it kind of stay the way it is right now. We think we can come up with an arrangement that we do a little bit of development with it, but mainly keep it in its natural state as it is now. It is not impact fee eligible, and we don't have a funding mechanism for it, but we do believe it's land and water conservation grant eligible, and that's a 1-to-1 match with the city. It would add 195 additional households. So, and this is right behind, just for your everyone's benefit, it's right behind the natatorium. So it's a natatorium and it's contiguous to Warm Springs Golf Course.
When I got to say, it looks so good in its natural state that I thought you all made it look that way.
Yep.
So
We do
I
some
can
road head
understand why
repairs, Madam-
residents are probably great with the way it is. I really did think it was a natural reserve.
Yeah, I think the neighbors, Madam Mayor, are interested in seeing it just stay the way it is. So it's probably what would end up doing or recommending.
Great.
Any further questions, Madam Mayor? Council members?
And this isn't the last chance. So if questions come up after this, please let's collect them, share with the department, and we'll have more conversations about this.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we're committed to continue these updates too with you. So you'll have us back here very soon.
Great, really
Madam
appreciate
Mayor,
it.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up, Doug. How do people interact with something like that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, that's kind of where we were thinking that we could provide maybe some sitting areas in there in the location, not do anything else, but just provide some benches possibly as low-level development, because right now the green belt's just on the other side of what you're looking at right there. It does have good access to the green belt and also from Martin Lane as well, but it
Great,
pretty
thank
much is
you.
something to look at.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So next week, as Courtney is coming up, I just want to kick off the presentation she'll be doing on behalf of the committee. Like any community in our country, we're challenged by balancing both how to respond to an immediate crisis faced by those who need a safe and welcoming space to shelter tonight or at night, with housing solutions that we're all committed to developing to end homelessness. And so I want to thank the Shelter Better Task Force members for the work that all of you did together. You know, you gave a lot of time and attention to this issue. And I also want to thank city staff and the agencies that came and helped by providing information. The conversations of the task force were centered around values of compassion, community, and service. That's what I asked them from day one to remember as they tackled this tough issue. And I received the final report on Friday. Courtney is here today to present pieces and parts of that, and look forward to them seeing how we put these recommendations into action.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Thanks for having me back. I gave you a preview of where we were in this process, who made up the task force, and kind of the subject matter that was covered. So today I stand before you to do my best job of representing the final recommendations of a large task force. So just a quick thing to remember, I'm speaking to you as the task force chair. It's my intention to bring to you the collective consensus of this group. So when I say we, I'm not talking about the city, I'm talking about the task force. I've confused many in that space, so I thought I'd point that out. As a reminder, the task force members spent many hours over summer in a pandemic talking about a very challenging community issue. We had a lot of diverse input from task force members. We had neighborhood support and opposition. We had subject matter experts, the medical community, shelter providers, faith leaders, business leaders, and those with lived experience. And just to say, I've been told this is a mark of success. I have made no one or anyone 100% happy through this process. What I can tell you is there's a lot of pride and ownership in the report you received and the recommendations I'll go through, but I don't want you to be under the belief that everyone is happy with everything that was discussed. The recommendations represent the majority, not a full consensus of the task force members. And there are some issues yet to be resolved, which I will cover later in the presentation. So there were two main outcomes in the charge of the task force. One was a shelter needs analysis, which I will cover here. The other was a land scan in regards to where else the shelter may be able to go outside of the proposed State Street location. So this is a snapshot in time. It was provided by the Corporation for Supportive Housing. So this is where we are in terms of shelter demand, peak demand, the current capacity we have, and the gap in that. So what this really demonstrates is we have a gap for families with children experiencing homelessness at 111 beds at peak demand. And we do not in the system have adequate bed capacity for the medically fragile or those being discharged with the hospital right now, particularly in light of COVID. So the Red Lion and the lease with that hotel is currently providing that temporary shelter for that group, but it is clear that the system is not designed to support the needs of that group, particularly right now. Okay. The land scan. So with consultants and with suggestions from the task force and community members, we did a land scan of available properties in the city of Boise. 56 properties were presented, and we looked at on-market opportunities, city-owned parcels, off-market parcels that are owned by other government entities. And then we applied 3 filters. So we needed the authority. So the location of the proposed shelter needed to be within the city of Boise because that's where your authority lies. Second, it needed to be consistent with Boise City Code. Emergency shelters are only allowed by conditional use permit. And this seemed to be a surprise to most task force members. 7% of the city is available for shelters in our current code. So that reduced the list substantially to the properties that would be eligible to be a shelter. And then the size needs as per interface sanctuaries, current plan, were 300 square feet building or a 1 to 2 acre lot. So when you apply those filters, we went from 56 properties to 3. So one is an ACHD parcel on Front Street. The other is all I can describe as behind the Walmart on Vanell Way, and then the current proposed State Street location. So given the lack of land options provided in this land scan, which again, I believe were a surprise to most of the task force members and fairly unbelievable with a city of our size, that currently there are only 3 properties remaining once the filters were applied. So the lack of property options, the lack of expertise on how to either reimagine the shelter system for different property or understanding what other land may be coming online, and the need to spend more time with the neighborhoods to get recommendations about their concerns with siting. The committee, under my direction, decided to change course and prioritize recommendations in 3 focus areas, which I am going to go over. So the first is shelter best practices. The second is community criteria. And the third is recommendations for leadership.
Well, and Courtney, I'd say too, I mean, we wanted, I appreciate the work of the task force, and these 3 items are things that we wanted out of this report as well. So I don't know that I'd characterize it as changing course, because this was very much in line with expectations and the ask that we had in terms of receiving information and recommendations on best practices, citing, et cetera.
Madam Mayor, to your point, the land scan produced such little options that we felt our time was best spent diving in, particularly of an area that the task force did not feel we had allocated enough time to, which is the community criteria.
Great.
To your point. These are, again, all areas of general agreement. I will hit on the ones that do not have that. Shelter policy should be aligned with national best practices for system-wide approaches to emergency shelters. And really, the sentiment behind this is one shelter at one point in time doesn't reflect the needs of this community and the partners who exist in this space and must. So every conversation was about the interaction between interface sanctuary, day shelter, the services that are needed on the mental health capacity. So one shelter does not a system make. And each of these pieces need to follow best practices and understand they're part of a larger system. We talked quite a bit about low barrier shelter. I think it was largely agreed that shelter needs to offer immediate and low barrier access to anyone facing a housing crisis. And the shelter should operate with the goal of assisting guests to get to permanent housing. There's also a big recognition that our data systems used to collect information are not what they need to be. So there is a commitment of folks moving forward to do a better job of collecting data. So the city and our partners are better able to make real-time decisions. Access to services, the shelter service should align with the goal of returning people or stabilizing them to permanent housing. Supportive services in the shelter setting, services in shelter settings benefit shelter guests when they increase access and relate to best practices. And then transportation, the shelter site should provide access to options for affordable transportation that shelter guests can easily use. Again, these are the highlights. You all probably saw in your email, you have the report, but the appendix is not something I can claim to have gone through in great detail since Friday. So I am attempting to just hit the highlights. So community criteria, the process for siting shelter should have concrete ways to engage with and respond to community considerations, both leading up to and after the siting of shelter. There was a lot of discussion and a recommendation about a community engagement board that shelter providers should create a body of leaders who formalize a process for community engagement in parallel with the siting effort. Proactive emergency and safety plans. The shelter provider and partners should develop a responsive and collaborative safety plan. The city has a role in this space. Well, our police and fire made it clear we could respond to any needs regardless of where the shelter was located. There was definitely much more interest in a proactive policing and fire strategy to help with this community. And so I think that was some of the reasoning behind this recommendation.
Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Courtney, really quickly, in the previous slide, there was a community engagement board, and then I think the recommendation was some form of organizational infrastructure for engaging with us in the process. And my question is, did the task force envision that would be different than a neighborhood association and its participation in the conditional use permit process, like something in addition to or above? Because I see that as serving that function, so I'm confused.
I know I have notes. The task force envisioned both. So both the community engagement board and the city's outreach efforts associated with the conditional use permit. Think of more as outreach ambassadors with a time limited in duration that would be aligned with the conditional use permit. But there was truly a sense of the task force that not enough engagement has been happening in this space. One example was even when the creation of the task force, in addition to all the permitting processes, a lot better and more information came out about the proposal.
Thank you.
Good neighbor agreements should be in place. Shelter provider and neighborhood members should establish a vision and goals that work together, that address concerns. An important point with good neighbor agreements is they are responsive in real time. So it's not one of those agreements that's signed and is never revisited. The task force envisioned these being kept up to date and revisited to ensure that all parties were getting what they needed to out of those agreements. And then residential buffers. The task force wanted to acknowledge in the city's draft code amendments that there's a recommendation for a 300-foot residential buffer for a shelter zone, and that would complicate the current proposed State Street site. You have not approved this recommendation. It has just been part of the process with a consultant about the areas of code you may consider to for update. Recommendations for leadership. There are many leadership bodies impacted by or who influence the process to site an emergency shelter. You all, of course, the Planning and Zoning Commission, the entity itself, in this case, Interfaith Sanctuary and their board of directors, and our Path Homes Executive Committee. And as leadership bodies approach decisions regarding the shelter, the task force would like you to consider the following recommendations. Meet the need for emergency shelter. The city should have enough emergency shelter beds to meet the needs, and not citing a new emergency shelter is simply not an option in the minds of our task force members. And there should be a criteria for citing shelter. Our Path Home, as the public-private partnership for ending homelessness in Ada County, should develop and publish a set of formal criteria that are used to evaluate a shelter siting proposal for alignment with best practices and to ensure the whole system is taken into account when a single shelter is being sited. Address shelters in the zoning code. Updates to the city zoning code, as I mentioned, have not been finalized. the task force would like you, when that time is appropriate, to have a robust discussion and more considerations of any setbacks or any specific codes as they relate to emergency shelters. And conditional use permit, the guidance was the city of Boise should take additional steps alongside that process for robust public engagement. Council member Bajan, I believe that is to your point as well. Invest in housing solutions. It is clear that the best path to help support this community is to find housing solutions. Emergency shelters are temporary and called emergency for very good reason. And the most we can do in this space is to invest in housing solutions in order to alleviate the challenges. And consider alternatives was another recommendations. Partners should look beyond the shelter model. It either programs that would enhance the situation or create better pipelines out of the shelter. Examples were residential work plans and community-based public safety systems. And I'll touch on the multi-site potential in an upcoming slide. So, task force non-alignment. It's clear that there was not consensus around this point. As I mentioned, the minimum of 300 feet from residential zones is being contemplated in the draft zoning code rewrite. The consultant did the research to support that recommendation and the consideration of what other cities are doing in this space. There was a discussion of the task force. One, there was support of including this as a minimum buffer. There's also a lot of concern, particularly among the various shelter providers, that this may make it impossible to site a shelter in the city. There is also not alignment on the consideration of multi-site. Councilmember Woodings, I think you asked me about this last time. First off, there's no definition of multi-site. So in the discussions, it was clear the meaning of the word was very different depending on whose perspective was being represented. So we did spend quite a bit of time defining those different interpretations. So one was the request for Interfaith Sanctuary to evaluate their organization's ability to operate multi-site shelters to reduce the size of the single shelter. Another was to desire to evaluate feasibility resulting in smaller shelters sited throughout the community, regardless of the operator of the shelter. And then thirdly is the intention to develop shelter locations that serve guests by population segments. So I would think more like Valor Point, where the target market is veterans coming out of the shelter system into housing, or in this case, which was mentioned in the task force, families as a separate shelter from other distinct populations. So I think the confusion of the lack of definition of this word and that it was clearly being interpreted in different ways resulted in the task force just sharing with you these several different ways this term was used during this process.
Madam Mayor, I think, Courtney, something that I heard was the word that I kept hearing was, we don't want people warehoused. And that's where I first heard that multi-site. So just to give my own interpretation of the way it was explained to me, just to complicate things a little bit.
I appreciate that. The task force, I think, found it much easier to hindsight's 2020, right? to provide advice on how to do this better the next time without the complications of the current proposal. So they did provide this picture of a future shelter engagement timeline, ideally how the task force would like to see the siting of a shelter handled with the steps included. So this is a snapshot and does a much clearer job than I did of the 7 steps this task force envisioned having a better, more robust process associated with siting a shelter. And then lastly, because I know you're going to ask me the next steps with the interfaith sanctuary proposal specifically, the city expects Interfaith to restart the conditional use permit for the State Street project. And these are the steps associated if and when Interfaith chooses to restart the process. Some of these steps are additions from the task force recommendations, and some based on the recommendations are missing because of where this site selection process is in our permitting. And then this is the list of everything that's in here. So if the staff did a really nice job with this whole process and did a super good job of doing the appendices that probably has every piece of information you might want to know. In addition to, I asked them to pull all the emails we've gotten on this topic so everyone could see them all in one place. And it also, we did a lot of stakeholder surveys with folks who we thought could bring expertise or insights into the recommendations of the task force. So those are included in the appendices as well. And with that, I think my plan is to cede time to the council president, who also served on the task force, where she can tell me what I did wrong. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Courtney. We are short on time, so I'll keep this relatively short, and we'll look for another time, maybe when we can ask and answer questions more in a strategic planning format.
Yeah, I wanted you guys to have this as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And then, yes, follow
And
up.
yeah, so that was the plan all along. I think Courtney did a good job of setting the stage for how the task force worked. And first, I'd like to thank any task force members, those in the audience and those online who are watching tonight. They put a lot of effort into this. They spent a lot of time. They put a lot of thought into it. I was really impressed with how diligent everyone was in attempting to sift through all this information and figure out not just how to serve their own needs, but how to serve our community's needs. So thank you. The things that I guess I'd highlight, they're partly the things that Courtney talked about, but I think the very first one is shelter best practices. And I think there was a fair amount of consensus and discussion around making sure that shelter and housing aren't co-located, that the two things really aren't compatible, even temporary housing if it's meant to last for any long time. And I think there was if you just look at how shelter works around the country, really important for that. Part of that was informed by looking at peer cities and the kinds of shelter that exist in some of our peer cities. And nearly all of those were either a very large campus where if you did have multiple uses, you really could have separate spaces for them, or more discrete services. The other part, in terms of the buffer that came up. I will say I followed up on it personally because I wanted to know, from a planning perspective, as a planner, what are the best practices now? And I would say that what I learned would align with what our consultant told us, which is those places that do have buffers, and most places are moving toward them, 300 feet is pretty minimal. And that residential uses, permanent residential uses, are not looked at as compatible directly adjacent. How we deal with that here, I don't know, but that is a movement around the country. I would say, in addition to that, that the shelter task force itself really thought deeply about that. And one of the solutions that did emerge, and this sort of gets into the kind of understanding of what does multi-site mean. One of the discussions that did emerge is, would it be acceptable to site shelter adjacent to residential if it were a certain small size, and what would that size be? And would that actually be healthy for everybody, not for the people who need that shelter as well as the neighborhood? And that possibly it could be. The task force was somewhat concerned with CU enforcement. Part of it is a lack of understanding of our process, but part of it is, especially if a shelter is sited in a residential neighborhood, we will face as a city a different enforcement regime than we've faced in the past. And so I think that's just something we all need to be aware of. And then I would encourage you all, if you haven't, much of it is in the appendix, but some of the presentations that were offered to the task force were really informative. And if you have more questions about those things, we can make those available. I think, some of the statistics about what's happening in our area, what's happening in other places, how are other places dealing with this. I think the neighborhood did an excellent job of digging into some of the concerns they had and offering some data around those concerns. This is now going to be something that I hope as a community we can embrace together and work on a solution together. I don't know that it's going to be anybody's best day to force people into corners and make those corners square off. So I hope that this information provides us a basis to go forward and see if we can find a collaborative solution. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. With that, thanks for those final words, Council President. We will recess for 25 minutes and be back here at 6.